for a long time. For that, you should use a real database. But this is, again, kind of fast storage for when the flow is running, right? So again, you can, of course, save data for a little bit. That doesn't mean you have to delete it right away. But keep in mind, it's a quick, fast storage for flows, and not a real database. All right, so okay. Now to create a table, I'm in this folder called Meetup, and then there are two tabs: flows and tables. And then if you need to create a table, you go to tables, and then you click a table, create new, and then we give it a name. So we'll call this shopping table. You can give it a description if you would like. Shopping table, and then click save. Okay. Now there are two columns which are automatically created. That's the row ID and also when the row was updated. And then you can create any number of columns. So I'm going to create one column, and I'm going to call this product. And then the column has a type, and these are the types that you can use. Okay. And then I'm going to click create, right? And then if you need to enter a value, so I'm going to enter apples, for example, right? And then that's it. So that's how you create a table. You can also import. So if you have a CSV file, you can import data into this table, so you don't need to type everything. You can also export into a CSV file. Okay, and you can also delete all rows. So for example, I only have one row, but if I want to delete it, right, all the rows. Okay, so this is how you kind of work. Again, it looks very at a kind of like in the Google Sheets, but of course, very, very, very basic. But now let's see how we can interact, or how we can manage a table from a flow. So I'm going to click on the folder, and I'm going to exit back, and I'm going to go to flows. Okay, so the first example we're going to see is how do you create data. I'm going to click new flow, and I'm going to call this create, and I'm going to enable this option, and this will allow me to see the history as the flow runs. Right, I'm going to click save. And now first, where do you get the data? So of course you can get the data from a remote service, for example, but in this particular example, I'm going to create the data right in the flow. And then to do that, I'm going to use a function. Okay. Now functions, these are all the actions or all the functions that allow you to create and manipulate data, right? So there are various categories for branching, error handling, flow control. You can work with text, numbers, true or false, date and time. You can create objects, file, and list. So this particular one, I'm going to use a list category, and then I'm going to use the construct. So it allows me to create a list. Okay, and then for the first one, I'm going to say, so we'll use let's see, cheese, and then I'm going to say milk. So we'll go shopping today, eggs and bread. All right. So what I did is that I created a list, and I can also test this card, which again, I highly recommend you do as you're building your flows. You test each individual card. Now, right here at the bottom says run this card, and I can run it, and I can see how the list will look. Right. So this is the list. I mean, this one is straightforward. All right. But again, I've used a function card, and then I used the list construct card to create a list. So again, functions, these are all the actions you can take to manipulate data and create if-then type logic, create loops, which you're going to use in just a second. All right. Now, how do we save this into a table? Now, let's go into function again. And if I scroll down under tables, these are all the actions that I can take. when working with the table. So I can clear a table, I can create a row, delete a row, export to CSV, import from CSV, I can read a row, read table. So this is the metadata. I can search rows and I can update a row. Now, if I want to just update, insert one value, then what I can do is I can use a create row. It's going to ask me to choose a table. So I have to navigate to my folder, which is right here, and select the table. And when I choose the table, I click save, it's going to read the information about the table, and it knows that I have one column, which is product, and I'm going to click save. So if I want to say something, so for example, butter, okay, and I can test this card, click run. And now I want to open the table. Let me do this. Let me open a new tab. I'm going to go to tables and open. And we can see that I created one entry from a flow. Let me quickly see if there are any questions. I don't see any questions, so good. So I'm assuming you guys can all hear me again. If someone can put just a thumb up in the chat, that would be awesome. And I know some people had some issues with the video and audio before. Okay, now, but this is fine for just creating one entry. But of course, you want to be able to get, create this list sort of automatically, like in a loop. So we're going to do that. So for that, I'm going to exit. I'm going to create a helper flow. Now, if we have a list of items and we want to save them, we need to have a helper flow which will iterate over the list and then save them into a table. Right here, I have my main flow where I create the list. Again, in this example, I created the list right in the flow. Probably you're going to get the data from somewhere else as you're building kind of a more real automation. But I'm going to create a new flow. Now, a helper flow is a flow that another flow can call. And to make a flow a helper flow, the first event will be a helper flow. Okay, and then so now this flow is a helper flow. I also want to give it a name. So let's call this create. And I'm going to call this helper. And I'm going to enable this option. So again, so I can see how the data sort of flows as from card to card as I run the flow. Okay. But now I need to define the input. And so I know I'm going to be passing a product. So in this particular case, there's just one input into this flow. Of course, you can create a helper flow with any number of inputs. I'm going to click right there in a product. And then usually, now in this particular case, our type is text, but there are other situations where the data type might be different. So you can always change the data type if you need to. Okay. Now, I'm going to hold off until saving the data into a table. I just want to make sure that I can pass the data into this flow. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my folder. And I'm going to open the main flow. And I'm going to finish building it. So I'm going to add a function. Again, when you need to iterate over a list, it's going to be a function. And so I'm going to list category, and then I'm going to use the for each. So this particular function allows me to iterate over a list. All right, and this is how it looks. And now this particular card requires input. Now, how do you pass input? Well, you take data from previous cards and connect it to the input. Now, how do you do that? Is you take the list and you just connect it like this, right? So this is my favorite capability in workflows, is this the ability to connect or pass data from card to card. I'm going to delete this and show you one more time. So I take the list and just connect it like this. All right. Now it's asking me to choose a flow, the helper flow. I'm going to choose a helper flow. Now notice right here, there is just one input here, concurrency. Okay. So, but when I set the helper flow, it will show me an extra input. So I'm going to, again, I have to navigate to the folder. All right, so Meetup. And this is the helper flow. I'm going to create it when I choose. So notice that then it showed me a new entry. So when you set a helper flow, what happens is that workflows reads, it sees what inputs are available on the helper flow, and then shows me the inputs here. Okay, so again, it reads the first card on the helper flow and then shows me the inputs. If you make any changes, then you would need to click on the helper flow again, and kind of choose it again, and then you'll see any updated input fields. Okay, but what I'm going to do is there's just one item, just the value itself. So I'm going to say I'm going to pass the product itself from the list into the helper flow. All right, so let's save and let's turn this on. So I'm going to turn on the flow. This option is, again, it saves the data as the flow runs. So you can come back and see what data was used for each flow run. I'm also I'm going to open the helper flow. I'm clicking on this icon. I'm going to open the helper flow. I need to turn the flow on as well. All right. And now I can run. So before I would test individual cards, but now I am testing the entire flow. I'm going to click run. All right. And so there's one run of this flow, which is the main flow. But if I go to the helper flow, I should see 4 runs, right? Each run, a run for each product. And I can see 4. And so this means, all right, the data, I can see the data passed to the helper flow. So if I select the first one, it's going to be cheese. Then I looked at it's milk. All right. But again, that's why this saving the data is very useful, is that you can see the data. Okay. If I run the flow again, I have one run here. If I run it again, right, I have 2 runs. And then on the helper flow, I'm going to have 8. Sometimes you just have to go and come back. We can see 8 runs. But if I need to, I can always go back and see, okay, let me see what data was in this particular run, right? And you can also search here if you would like. So that's also an option. All right, so this works. Now we need to save this data into a table. So I'm going to click on the function, and I'm going to scroll to tables, and then I'm going to create row. And again, I'm going to choose a table. So you do have to navigate to the table. And again, it's going to read the table metadata. And there's just one input. That's fine. That's what we need. And then all right. And I'm going to click save. All right, so let's go back to the main flow. Let's click run again. All right, and let's go to the table and then refresh. And we see the 4. I had the one from before. So we have 4. But I can click delete all rows if I would like. Let's run this again. And I'll run the flow again. And refresh. All right, we got the 4 items. Let me see if there are any questions. All right, I don't see any questions. So, all right, now what's going to happen? Let's say I run the flow again. Now, the previous time I deleted the rows, but let me run the flow again. And of course, I'm going to have 8 entries now. And right now, if you want to clear the table before each run, that's of course possible. And I'm going to go here. I'm going to go to my main flow. And just before I call the helper flow, right, or maybe before I create the list, I can decide to clear the table. Now let's do it here. Let's say I want to do it at the beginning. So again, I'm going to go function, and I'm going to go to tables, right? And then I'm going to use clear table. And again, you have to select, let's select the table. All right, choose and then save. Now this particular card doesn't have any inputs. It just clears the table. And then let's run. All right. And if I reload, I should just have 4 entries, right? Because we cleared, then we saved, and now we have only 4 entries here. Okay. So this is an example of creating data, right? We also saw how to iterate over a list with helper flow. We also looked at how you can test individual cards. We also looked at how to test the entire flow. And then we also know that, it's a good idea to enable this history. But again, if it's not enabled, you can always turn it on and then it will be saved. All right, so this is good. Now let's look at how do we read data from a table. Let me exit. Right. And let me turn these flows off. Okay. So I'm going to create a new flow, and let's call this read. Again, I'm going to enable the history. Okay. Now, and again, if I go back to function, and if I go to tables, and then I look here, where is this? Read row, right? So I see read a row from a table, and I select the card, and I'm going to choose a table again. Okay. All right, and then so I can see that it requires a row ID. Also, this card only has one input, but other cards will have more inputs. If you're not sure how the card works, what you can always do is that next to this run this card, there is also a question mark, which opens the help. Okay, and it opens the help for this card, which you can will tell you how the card works. So I mean, I use this all the time. So again, I highly recommend you use that as well, just to learn how a card works. But as for the row ID, I can go back to the table, and I can maybe I can copy a row, and I can paste the row ID, and then I can test the card. All right, and then I get the cheese, that's the product I get back. So I know that this works. If I want to, I can also, of course, test the entire flow as well, and I get the same result. But again, this is cool if you want to just do one row, but usually you will want to iterate over a table and retrieve all the values from a table and then do something. So for that, we are going to again go to tables. And the way to do that is that we're going to use search rows. Okay, and let's select the table. So this is the only thing you have to kind of do every time. And then there's an option, so you can do just one matching row, but we're going to use all matching rows, and click save. Right, and then these are, so you can see this card has more inputs, and I'm going to click save. Now, we're not going to be using these inputs. And then, of course, there are other cards that also have other inputs that you maybe don't want to use. So you can hide these inputs. Now, again, at the bottom of the card, there is a gear icon. If you click the gear icon and then select choose fields, you can select which fields you want to show or not. We don't want to, we're just going to return all the values just to keep it straightforward. So I'm going to uncheck everything that's optional here, and then click save. And then this is how it looks. So I like, I personally, if there are fields that I don't use, I don't want to sort of see them. And so I like to hide them. Now you can test this card and just, we're going to get all the values back, and then we get the 4 items. Okay. All right. So this is the main flow. Now we need to create a helper flow again because we're iterating over a list. So this was the first helper flow, but I'm gonna create another one. And I'm gonna call this read helper, right? And again, to make this a helper flow, the first card has to be the helper flow card. And I'm gonna use product, right? And so next, once you have the value here, then you can, of course, continue building the flow and do what you need. But just an example, let's use another card here. And I'm going to call the card called assign. So notice you can, if you know the category, if you know, you can sort of browse, but you can also search. So I use this all the time, is that you can search for a card. So assign, I'm going to use the assign card. The assign card just creates a variable, so just like this. And then you can sort of continue using this later in the flow. All right. Let's go back. And also, so for searching, I'm going to do for each. And I'm going to use the list. So when you search, you have to look at the from which category it's sort of coming. There is one from list, there's one from objects. You want to use the one from list, right? And then we're going to connect the rows. Let's make sure, this one is saved. Let's click choose flow and find the flow. And this is read helper. And we will pass the product date, the product itself. And we can now, let's see, this flow is on. We need to turn the helper flow on. All right, and let's run. All right. And let's go to the helper. And we can see there are 4 runs. And then you can look at each run. So there's milk, eggs, right? And so you can see each run. So and then you can continue using once you have each product in the helper flow, you can continue building the flow and build the rest of the logic. All right. So that's how you would read data from a table. Again, using the search rows card, you would get the rows that you need. And again, you can also search, right? So I returned all the rows, but you could search for particular rows. So that's also possible. All right, let me see if there are any questions. Let's see. I'll quickly answer them. So there's one question. What happens if you have more than 4 items? Will you use for loop? So yes, anytime you have, even if you have, 2 items, right? Anytime you want to iterate over a list, you need to use a for each or for loop to process each item. So yes. And then another question, how can I rewatch the recording? So once we end the session in about 5 more minutes, I'm going to go a little bit over time. The recording will be available right on the same page. And then also tomorrow it will be on YouTube, and you'll get a message from Crowdcast with a link to the recording. But I do want to show you 2 more things, and that's how to update and also delete. So let's do that. Let me turn these flows off. All right, so for update, right, we will, again, use add function. And if we want to do search update row, and then there's just one result, I'm going to use that. I'm going to go to the table, and I'm going to copy a row. So choose a table. And click save. And then I need to specify the row ID like this. And then the product, for example, butter. Okay. If you want to, just to show you another example using the assign, and I said it creates a variable. Let me show you how this would look in this example. So I can create butter. So it just creates a variable, and then I can do something like this, right? Let's run this. All right, and let's look at the table and refresh. You have to reload the page. Oh, there's no butter. Did I select the wrong table? It happened before. Um, Let me see if I maybe selected the wrong one. Let me quickly go. No, this is the right one. Okay, let's run this again. Oh, how come I don't see butter here? Um, this happened to me. Oh, here we go. Oh, now I see butter. Sorry, maybe I just missed it. All right. So no, the butter is here. Okay. All right. Well, why don't we just update one more row? So let's do cheese. Why don't we update? We will update another here. And let's I don't know. Chicken. And let's run. All right. Sorry, I'm clicking the wrong places. All right. Chicken. Here we go. All right. Anyhow, so it works. I don't know. Maybe you didn't see it. Maybe it was there. All right. Now, the last example that I'm going to show you is how to delete a row, and it's going to work very similar. So I have the chicken row saved or copied. So I'm going to go and click a new, and then we'll call this delete. And if I type delete row, and again, I do need to choose the table. So let's do this quickly. And then, so this should be the chicken row. And if I test the card, all right, let's see if, so now the chicken was deleted. Okay. Now, if you want to delete multiple rows, so there are a number of ways to do it. So you do need to have the row ID. So you can search, get all the row IDs, for example, save them somewhere, and then iterate over the list of row IDs, and then delete multiple rows this way, right? So of course I'm deleting one, but you can delete multiple rows as well. All right. Well, very good. That's all I wanted to show you. So we saw how to create data, create, save data into a table, read data from a table, update, and then also delete. And then we also saw how to create use for each, to iterate over the list, how to test cards, how to test a flow. There are two more things I'm going to quickly mention, just kind of as a part of the fundamentals of workflows. So I mentioned that when you add a function, these are all the functions or actions that allow you to manipulate data. So you can create, delete, modify. There's a for each, logic, and other functions you can take. Now, on the other hand, we didn't use any actions here, but these are calls to other services. So these are all the connectors that Okta Workflows provides. And so you can call um, actions or API endpoints or on these connectors. And I have many other meetups in the Getting Started series where we use various connectors. So if you go to Crowdcast or YouTube, you'll see many so examples where we use various connectors. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, we didn't really cover it here, is that how do you trigger a flow, right? So there are several main ways you can trigger a flow. We saw how to create a helper flow. That's when a flow calls another flow. But there are two really probably most ways, or I probably shouldn't say most popular, but most common, I should say, ways to trigger a flow. One is when an event happens in Okta, for example. And so you can trigger a flow. That's number one. That's on an event. Um, and you're not limited to just Okta. You can use any of these connectors. And if there is an event that the connector supports, then you can trigger a flow on that event. And then number two, also on schedule. So you can run a flow on schedule. So maybe every 5 minutes, every hour, or every day, and so on. Okay. Now, I should say the third way, which is also common, is an API endpoint. So you can have another system call an API point, which will in turn trigger a flow. Okay. So I just wanted to cover that as part of the fundamentals. And again, we have other meetups, if you go on YouTube, that where I cover these topics in more detail. All right. Well, cool. Let me see if there are any questions. I see there's does Okta have a plan to build a function to create delete tables automatically in the flow instead of create tables manually? So interesting question. I can find out. So there is a way you can dynamically set choose a table in runtime, but there is no option to dynamically create the table. Let me show you what I mean by that. Let's just delete row, for example. So right here, I was choosing a table, setting it manually, but there is a way provide table at runtime. So you could provide a table at runtime. But again, the table needs to exist, right? So you can create it. You can just, if you have several tables, you can decide which table you want to use. So that's available today. But I can find out, and what I can do is I'll just put a response here back in chat, and I'll reply with more information. I'm gonna say I don't believe so, but I'm going to confirm that. So hopefully that helps. All right, folks. Let me put the slide back up. If you have any questions, my email is in the first slide, so you can always email me with any questions. But other than that, thank you for joining today. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.